Aisha Nogueira never imagined she would wake to the sound of her own daughter crying from hunger inside a makeshift tent, hidden between glass buildings and hurried executives in Chicago. 27 years old, single mother, no steady job, no address she could write on any form, just a black tarp stained with rain, and the constant feeling of occupying space that didn't belong to her. She cleaned bar restrooms in exchange for stale sandwiches. She collected aluminum cans on frozen sidewalks. She accepted any cleaning gig that came up, even those paid in crumpled cash and distrust. But exhaustion had a face now. Fever, dizziness, trembling hands trying to tie her daughter's torn sneaker. Amira, at 6 years old, already knew what real hunger was. She knew her mother hid the pain, pretended to be fine, smiled while splitting the last piece of bread in half. And that gray morning, when she saw her mother collapse onto the damp cardboard, Amira didn't think. She just ran. She ran between cars stopped at the red light. She banged on the tinted window of a black sedan with desperate force. On the other side, Zaid Al Maktoum, 35, Crown Prince of Doha, was reviewing contracts for a meeting with American investors. He wore a tailored suit. He smelled of amber and imported leather. He lived surrounded by security guards, simultaneous translators, and advisors who organized every minute of his day. He didn't expect to hear a child's voice screaming, "My mom is really sick, please help her." Something inside him broke before logic could interfere. Against all protocols, against the nervous gesturing driver, Zaid opened the door and stepped out of the car. He followed Amira through narrow alleys, between overflowing dumpsters and dark puddles of dirty water, until he found Aisha unconscious inside a structure that barely deserved the name shelter. Without hesitation, he lifted her in his arms. He felt the weight too light, the skin hot with fever, the smell of sweat and fear stuck to her worn clothes. And he carried that unknown woman to the nearest hospital, ignoring honking horns, cell phone flashes, scandalized looks, and the security guard's voice shouting that this would be a diplomatic disaster. In the emergency room, doctors confirmed severe malnutrition, dehydration, extreme exhaustion. Amira hadn't eaten properly in days. Zaid was stuck in the waiting room with a child who stared at him as if he were the last solid thing in a collapsing world. And it was there, between orange plastic chairs and the smell of hand sanitizer, that the prince, who always had everything, realized he never had anything real. No one waited for him at home. No one would call crying if he disappeared. No one would throw their body in front of a truck for him, the way Aisha would for her daughter. Zaid Al Maktoum had palaces, bank accounts in 5 countries, meetings scheduled until next semester. But he didn't have this, small eyes trusting him as if he were the only possible anchor. Amira fell asleep in his lap while they waited for news about her mother. Zaid held that tiny body with the care of someone who had never held anything fragile before. The doctors warned that Aisha would need to stay hospitalized for at least 3 days. Controlled feeding. But Zaid simply picked up the sleeping child, signed the temporary guardianship papers, and left the hospital as if carrying something infinitely more valuable than million-dollar contracts. He took Amira to the delegation's hotel, later to the house he had rented in Chicago, away from official noise. Between delivery food orders, English cartoons with Arabic subtitles, and stories told with a heavy accent, something impossible began to form. Bond. Amira called him Uncle Zaid for the first time while he was trying clumsily to comb her rebellious curls before bed. She laughed at the crooked way he tied her pajama bow. He felt his chest tighten in a way he never felt during official speeches or summit meetings. And for the first time in years, Zaid reorganized his schedule around the bath time and dinner of a child who wasn't even his. When Aisha woke up in the hospital 3 days later and learned where her daughter was, shame swallowed her alive. Being seen in that state by a rich, powerful, unreachable foreigner was the ultimate humiliation. She wanted to tear out her hair. She wanted to disappear. She wanted never to have woken up. But Zaid entered the room with Amira by the hand, sat respectfully beside the bed, and explained, with a firm and gentle voice, what had happened. Part 3. He didn't speak of pity. He didn't use words like charity or kindness. He spoke of real, concrete, dignified possibilities. He offered a modest apartment, paid by him, until she fully recovered. He guaranteed a salary as a cleaning assistant for the Doha delegation. He promised, with disarming sincerity, that everything would be done with a signed contract, labor rights, zero favors, absolute respect. Aisha accepted for Amira's sake, not for him, not out of gratitude. Out of raw, naked necessity. The work started simple. Silent offices to clean, empty hallways. Spotless restrooms that no one noticed had been scrubbed by hands still trembling with fear of losing the opportunity. Zaid rarely appeared. When he did, he greeted her politely, formally, distantly, as he should. But slowly the crossings became more frequent. A forgotten coffee cup on a desk, a brief conversation about the price of rice, a timid question about life in the desert. He learned she had finished high school, dreamed of becoming a nursing technician, listened better than most people with degrees on the wall. She learned that behind the turban and expensive suit was a man who didn't know what it was like to come home and hear, "How was your day?" The shared routines created intimacy, and that intimacy began to resemble something dangerous, something neither of them was prepared to name. Zaid started leaving the office later, always finding some reason to pass through the hallway Aisha was cleaning. She started preparing tea the way he mentioned he liked, leaving it on his desk without saying a word. Small gestures, invisible to everyone else, deafening to them. One rainy night, Zaid found Aisha still at the delegation at 10 p.m., scrubbing the marble floor on her knees. He asked why she was still there. She answered that she wanted to finish before going home, so Amira wouldn't see her too tired. He sat on the steps and waited, just waited, until she finished. They walked together to the building's entrance. The rain pounded the glass door. Neither had an umbrella. Zaid called his driver, but before the car arrived, he asked, "Do you ever regret accepting my offer?" Aisha looked at him, really looked, saw the man, not the title. "Every single day, because I know one day this will end, and I'll have to go back to being invisible. And now I know what it's like not to be." Zaid felt something crack inside his ribs. He wanted to say that she would never be invisible to him again, but his phone rang. It was Hassan, his cousin and advisor from Doha. Urgent, critical. He needed to take the call. Part 4. The call lasted less than 3 minutes, but it was enough to change everything. Hassan informed that Fatima al-Sarran, Zaid's arranged fiancée, would be arriving in Chicago in 2 days, officially to support him during the final investment meetings, unofficially to ensure the future emir was behaving appropriately. Zaid hung up and stared at the phone as if it were a bomb. Aisha watched his expression shift from open to closed in seconds. The driver arrived. Zaid got in without another word. The car disappeared into the rain. Aisha stood there, soaked, understanding perfectly what she'd just seen. The wall going back up. Fatima al-Sarran arrived like a storm, dressed in silk. Sophisticated, educated in London, fluent in 4 languages, with connections to half the diplomats in the Middle East. She smiled the way people smile in photographs, calculated, perfect, empty. She observed every detail of the delegation, every person, every corner. And when she saw Aisha emptying a trash can, she stopped. "And who is this?" Fatima asked Zaid, in English, deliberately loud enough for Aisha to hear. "Cleaning staff," Zaid replied, his voice flat, charming. Fatima said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I imagine you ensure they're all properly documented. One can never be too careful with help from uncertain backgrounds." Aisha felt the blade of each word. She kept her head down and left the room. But Fatima's gaze followed her like a laser. That night, Fatima did what she did best. She investigated. In less than 24 hours, she had Aisha's entire story. The homelessness, the tent downtown, the fainting. The fact that the Crown Prince himself had carried a street cleaner to the hospital and was now paying her rent. "You're creating a scandal," Fatima told Zaid over dinner at the rented house, surrounded by advisors, pretending not to listen. "Do you have any idea how this looks? A future emir involved with a homeless woman? The council will devour you." "She's not a homeless woman. She's my employee," Zaid said, his jaw tight. "She's a risk, and risks must be eliminated." Zaid stood from the table. "Watch your words carefully, Fatima." But Fatima had already made her decision. Using her contacts in political and media circles, she began spreading carefully crafted insinuations, anonymous blogs, diplomatic gossip, whispers in the right ears. The narrative was simple and venomous. The cleaner is taking advantage of the Sheik's kindness. She's trying to trap the most powerful man in the room. She's a threat. End Part 5. Within a week, the first article appeared. A gossip website with ties to Gulf investors published a piece titled "Tropical Scandal, Crown Prince's Charitable Work or Something More." The article was careful, never naming Aisha directly, but everyone in the delegation knew exactly who they were talking about. Suggestions of impropriety, questions about judgment, concerns about the royal family's reputation. Aisha read it on her phone during lunch break, sitting alone in the delegation's break room. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the device. The words blurred. She felt naked, exposed, dirty. When she returned to work, she could feel the stares. Other staff members whispered. The security guard who used to nod hello now looked right through her. Fatima walked past with a smile that said, "I warned you about uncertain backgrounds." That evening, Zaid received a call from the Royal Council in Doha. The conversation lasted an hour. It was not a suggestion. It was an order. Return immediately. Control the narrative. Correct course before the family name is permanently tainted. The voice on the other end belonged to his uncle, the current emir, a man who had never raised his voice, but whose silence could crush kingdoms. Zaid sat in his office long after the call ended, staring at nothing. Hassan entered without knocking. "You knew this would happen. You knew the moment you carried that woman into the hospital. Her name is Aisha. Her name doesn't matter. What matters is that you're the Crown Prince. Your life is not your own. It never was." Zaid looked at his cousin with something close to hatred. "Then what is the point of any of this? The title, the power, the wealth, if I can't even choose who matters to me?" Hassan's expression softened, just barely. "Because 1,000 other lives depend on yours. You know this, Zaid. You've always known." The next morning, Zaid called Aisha into his office. She entered with her head down, already knowing what was coming. He stood behind his desk, formal, distant, exactly like the day they first met. He told her he was returning to Doha temporarily. He promised to keep sending her salary, covering the apartment, ensuring Amira's school. Every word sounded rehearsed. Every word sounded like goodbye. Aisha listened in silence. When he finished, she said, "Thank you for everything you've done for us, truly." Then she turned and walked out before he could see her face crumble. That night, Aisha made a decision. She would not be a burden. She would not be the scandal that destroyed a good man's future. She wrote a resignation letter, short and professional, thanking the delegation for the opportunity. She gathered what little money she had saved, started searching for another room to rent, even if it was worse, even if it meant starting over alone again. When Zaid's assistant found the letter the next day, she immediately called him in Doha. He was in a council meeting, surrounded by advisors and family members dissecting his every move in Chicago. He stepped out to take the call. When he heard that Aisha had quit, that she was planning to leave the apartment, that she refused to accept any more help, something inside him shattered. He stood in the marble hallway of his family's palace, phone in hand, and realized he had made the same mistake powerful men had been making for centuries. He had chosen safety over truth, protocol over people, image over love. The council meeting continued without him. Zaid didn't return. Instead, he went to his private quarters and stared at a photograph on his phone. A blurry picture Hassan had taken without permission, showing Zaid reading a bedtime story to Amira, the little girl's hand resting on his arm, complete trust in her eyes. For the first time in his life, Zaid understood what wealth actually meant, and he knew he was about to lose it all. The next day, he requested a private audience with the full royal council. His uncle presided, flanked by advisors, ministers, and his cousin Hassan, who looked at him with something between pity and resignation. Zaid stood before them, alone, and spoke without notes. He admitted his mistakes. He admitted he should have been more careful, more discreet, more aware of appearances. But then he said something no crown prince had said in that room for 3 generations. "I will not negotiate human lives for political alliances. I will not allow the honor of our family name to be used as a weapon against an innocent woman. And I will not marry Fatima al-Sirhan." The room exploded. Voices rose. His uncle's face turned to stone. Hassan closed his eyes. One advisor called it recklessness. Another called it treason. Fatima, who had returned to Doha to personally witness Zaid's rehabilitation, stood in the observation gallery, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Zaid let them speak, let them rage, and when the room finally quieted, he said, "I am still your prince. I will still serve this country, but I will not sacrifice my soul to do it. If that makes me unworthy of the crown, so be it." Part 7. The crisis that followed was enormous. Allies withdrew support. Political partners questioned their agreements. Rumors exploded across international media. Fatima gave carefully worded interviews, painting herself as the victim of a reckless prince, seduced by foreign simplicity. She never mentioned Aisha by name, but everyone knew. The narrative was set. Noble woman scorned, dynasty endangered, future uncertain. Hassan cornered Zaid in his quarters 3 days later. "You've chosen a stranger over an entire country. Do you understand what you've done? I've chosen to be a man instead of just a title. You don't have that luxury. Then I'll create it." But privately, Zaid was terrified. He had burned bridges he might never rebuild. He had damaged relationships that took decades to establish. And for what? For a woman who had quit, who had walked away, who probably hated him now for dragging her into a nightmare she never asked for. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. His uncle refused to speak to him. Half the council demanded he be removed from succession. The other half argued that removing him would cause even greater scandal. Zayd existed in a suspended state, neither prince nor exile, waiting for something he couldn't name. Then, on the 7th day, his assistant in Chicago sent him a message. Aisha had been spotted at the main bus terminal, with a suitcase, a stack of printed resumes, and a mirror clinging to her waist. Zayd didn't ask permission, didn't inform the council, didn't even tell Hassan. He simply booked the next commercial flight to Chicago. No private jet, no security detail, just him and a carry-on bag. For once in his life, Zayd al-Maktoum moved like a man with nothing left to lose. The flight took 14 hours. He didn't close his eyes once. He rehearsed 100 different speeches in his head. All of them sounded hollow. All of them sounded like something a prince would say, not something a man would feel. He landed at dawn, took a taxi to the bus terminal. The building smelled like cheap coffee and diesel fuel. Departure announcements echoed through grimy speakers. And there, sitting on a plastic bench near Gate 12, was Aisha, wearing her cleanest shirt, hair pulled back tight, holding Amira's hand while filling out an application form for a motel housekeeper position. Zayd stopped 10 feet away. She hadn't seen him yet. Amira had. The little girl's eyes went wide, then lit up with pure joy. "Uncle Zayd!" Aisha's head snapped up. Her expression went from shock to anger to something that looked dangerously close to heartbreak. She stood, putting herself between Zayd and her daughter. "What are you doing here?" "I came to apologize." His voice was rough, scraped raw from 7 sleepless nights. "And to tell you the truth, I don't need your truth. I need to catch a bus. Please, 5 minutes." Aisha looked at Amira, who was already trying to run toward Zayd. She gripped her daughter's hand tighter. "You have too." Zayd stepped closer, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into her face, close enough to smell the faint scent of the cheap soap from the apartment he'd paid for, and she'd already given up. "I was a coward. When my world demanded I choose between duty and you, I chose wrong. I chose silence. I chose distance. I let you believe you were a scandal when you were actually the first real thing that ever happened to me." "Stop," her voice cracked. "You don't get to say beautiful things now. You don't get to make this hurt more than it already does. I broke my engagement. I stood in front of the royal council and told them I wouldn't marry Fatima. I told them I wouldn't negotiate human lives for political convenience. I may have destroyed my own future, but I couldn't live with myself if I destroyed yours." Aisha stared at him. Her hands were shaking. "You broke your engagement? For what? We're nothing. We were never anything." "You're wrong." Zayd's voice dropped, became something raw and unpolished. "The day that light turned red, the day your daughter's hand hit my window, I found out what wealth actually means. It's not palaces or bank accounts. It's this. It's someone waiting for you. Someone who would throw themselves in front of a truck for you. Someone who sees you and not just the title." Tears ran down Aisha's face. "You don't understand. I can't be that person for you. I'm a cleaner. I live in donated apartments. My daughter eats donated food. You'll wake up one day and realize you gave up everything for nothing. Then let me be the one to decide what nothing means." Amira, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly pulled free from her mother's grip and ran to Zayd. She wrapped her arms around his waist and said, clear and loud enough for everyone in the terminal to hear, "Mom, please don't send him away. Please, he's family." Aisha crumpled, slid down onto the bench, and put her face in her hands. Zayd knelt in front of her, gently, as if approaching something wounded. I don't want to be your benefactor. I don't want to be your savior. I just want to be family. All three of us, together. She looked up at him through tears. What if it doesn't work? What if your country never forgives you? What if I'm not enough? Then we'll figure it out, the same way we've figured out everything else. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. I'm not asking you to fix my world. I'm asking if I can be part of yours. I am not asking you to fix my world. I'm asking if I can be part of yours. The agreement they made that day had no paperwork, no signatures or witnesses, just a promise. None of them would ever sleep on the emotional street again. They would face whatever came next as a unit, imperfect, unlikely, and unbreakable. The first few months were brutal. The media frenzy in the Gulf was relentless. Headlines ranged from sympathetic, modern prince chooses love, to vicious, royal scandal, crown prince abandons duty for foreign cleaner. Fatima gave interviews portraying herself as the dignified victim. Conservative factions called for Zayd's removal from succession. But Zayd's uncle, the emir, made a surprising move. In a private meeting, he told Zayd, I don't agree with your choice. I don't understand it. But I raised you to have principles, and you followed them. That counts for something. The council remained split, but the emir's refusal to strip Zayd of his title kept the door open. Barely. In Chicago, Aisha and Zayd built a life that looked nothing like either of their pasts. She refused to quit working, took online courses toward her nursing technician certification, and insisted on contributing to every household expense. He learned to cook eggs without burning them, to braid Amira's hair, to exist without an entourage. They fought sometimes about money, about privacy, about the reporters who still occasionally camped outside their building, about the hate mail Aisha received from strangers who thought she'd corrupted a prince. But they also laughed. They ate cheap takeout on the couch. They watched Amira perform elaborate dance routines to pop songs. They built something ordinary, and that ordinariness felt like a miracle. 6 months after the bus terminal, Zayd asked Aisha to marry him, not with a 5-carat diamond or a grand public gesture. He asked while they were washing dishes together, her hands in soapy water, his drying plates. He said, I want to make this official. I want the world to know you're not a scandal. You're my choice, every single day. She said yes, with soap suds still on her wrists. The wedding happened in Doha 8 months later. It was smaller than a royal wedding should be, but it was real. Some council members boycotted. Fatima's family sent a formal protest, but others attended. Hassan, who had slowly come to respect what his cousin had built. The emir, who gave a short but genuine blessing, and a surprising number of Doha's working-class community, who saw in Aisha's story a reflection of their own invisibility finally being acknowledged. R10. Aisha wore a dress that combined American simplicity with traditional Gulf embroidery. Henna decorated her hands, done by women in Doha, who had once. Amira ran between marble fountains and silk cushions, calling Zayd dad with the natural ease of someone who had finally, permanently found one. The vows were spoken in English and Arabic. Zayd's voice shook when he promised to honor her not as a subject, but as an equal. Aisha's voice broke when she promised to stand beside him, not behind. When they kissed, the small crowd erupted, not with polite applause, but with genuine joy. The new Sheikah refused to become palace decoration. Within a year, she launched a foundation focused on immigrant and invisible women workers, maids, cleaners, nannies, the people who kept society running but were never seen. She brought her story to decision-making tables, spoke at councils and conferences, and reminded everyone he proved he could be both a man and a prince. He negotiated trade agreements, represented Doha in international summits, and slowly won back the respect of those who had doubted him. He did it all with Aisha beside him, her presence a constant reminder of why power without humanity was worthless. Years later, when journalists asked Aisha what advice she had for women facing impossible odds, she said, "Run toward the red light, knock on the window, ask for help. Yes, the world will judge you. Yes, it will hurt. But staying silent guarantees you'll never be heard." And when they asked Zayd what he learned from walking away from tradition, he answered that the heaviest crown I ever wore was silence. The day I put it down and spoke the truth, I became free. Not powerful, free. Amira grew up between two worlds, fluent in 3 languages, comfortable in palace halls and Chicago streets alike. When asked about her unusual childhood, she always told the same story. "My mom taught me that dignity has nothing to do with money. My dad taught me that real wealth is someone who shows up. Together, they taught me that love doesn't erase hardship, it just makes you brave enough to face it." The red light that changed everything still stands at that intersection in Chicago. Thousands of cars pass through it every day. Most people never notice, but sometimes someone does. Someone sees the opportunity instead of the obstacle. Someone knocks on a window. Someone answers. And in those moments, impossible stories become real. Not because the world suddenly got fair, but because someone decided that fairness was worth fighting for. One red light, one knock, one answered door at a time.